All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If this is your first time here today, welcome to you. Everyone else, what's up? How are you doing? I am coming to you remotely from North Garden, Virginia this week. Longtime listeners know my in-laws live here, and we always come this time of year, but I don't always record while I'm here. I am on this occasion because I am heading home tomorrow, which is the day that I normally would be recording, and I'm not sure I want to have to try to record after the drive home. So we're doing it today. We are making it happen. We are making this last episode of 2024 happen. How about that? Another year has gone by. Crazy. Cheers to all of you who have listened to every episode. I don't know that there is as many of you as there has been in the past. There are a group of people who I believe have listened every week of this last year. And if you're one of those people, I'm speaking to you directly and I'm saying thank you. And I just so appreciate that you would invest your attention in the show that regularly and consistently, as I have been. I really appreciate that. I realized last week I did my official year-end check-in and I just didn't say much about the show or you, the listeners. I was so focused on the center and I was rushing off to get to here and all this stuff. So in any case, if you're listening now and you're one of those people, cheers to you. Thank you so much for all of your investment. And the other thing I would say is that part of the reason I think this show maybe has a few less listeners is I think I've been more focused over the last year in certain ways. And I've talked about this recently on the show of just being clear what I think this show does and what it's good for and not trying to have it be everything and not being reckless, or maybe it's not being reckless. Maybe it's just being clear so that I'm not choosing to have episodes or conversations that are inspired by sources of antagonism or sensationalism, that the inspirations for the conversations feel more pure. They're not like coming from Facebook, which I've done. I've had episodes that are spurned from me seeing something on Facebook, as opposed to something I feel inside or some interesting coincidence or synchronicity that happens between me and another person, or I get an email, all the things you guys know. If you listen, I always talk about how these episodes come about. In any case, I would say that if you're somebody who's listened to the show regularly, even if you didn't listen to every episode this year, but even if you just listened from time to time and you're listening now, I would sure be interested to know what you want to hear on this show. If there are particular topics or people that you think would be fun to have me bring on the show, then please reach out to me. And you know what else? If you want to come on the show, if you're a long-time listener and you just want to come on the show, email me. I think it would be great. I really would like to get some listeners on if you're interested. I'm sure it would be fun. And, more than anything, I'm grateful to anybody who cares about this at all. I do this as a ritual for myself. And I recently imagined, I was walking home from the center and I was having, let's just say, like a lapse in positive outlook. I was feeling a little bit low in spirits, and I was just thinking about, I don't know, the kind of grind of it all and was imagining what it would be like to just not do the show anymore and not even like have the center anymore, not be a yoga teacher anymore and just like bake bread and work at a bakery or something, you know, like, can I imagine that? What would that feel like to me? Like how attached am I to the performative aspect of what I'm doing here, you know, what I do as a yoga teacher? How much of that is like my own ego stuff, and could I let go of that? And I was able to imagine it actually kind of was appealing in certain ways. But at the same time, I also felt like there was still an important reason for me to keep doing this, that there's something deep for me in the process of doing this each week. And the fact that anybody listens to it has always been a wonderful part of it. So cheers to you, my old friends and new friends. If you're new around here, I appreciate that you're tuning in. I'm happy to be bringing you today a episode that I think is very much at the spirit of what the show is about. My guest today is Clive Sheridan. And I didn't really know who Clive was until I was speaking with Godfrey Devereaux, who came on the show and mentioned him. And then that was echoed by a listener who emailed me and said, oh, you should get Clive on. And then it somehow happened. And frankly, it took quite a while because Clive's not an easy person to track down. In fact, if you go search him, you're not going to find a lot about him as we discuss. He has been super low key, but those who know, and he's someone who came into yoga in the early days of it coming to the West, and in a way offers a glimpse into the way things were and perhaps some insight into the way things are now. So very cool to have had this chance to speak with Clive. It's a perfect way to finish out the year. Very happy to be bringing it to you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you are enjoying the show and you want to connect with me in other ways, there's lots of opportunities for us to do that. There's ongoing live classes online. There's a weekly discussion group. There's on-demand continuing education videos. Or maybe you would like to help support this show and get access to the full archives with a podcast premium subscription. All of that stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think we're just going to leave it there. I think that's just fine. I will touch base with you on the other side. But let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Clive Sheridan.
You hear me now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I hear you, yeah. Let's turn off the video then. And
all right, let's not bother with it.
Okay, that's cool.
It's kind of fitting, too, in a way.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I say that only because, well, first of all, before I start to get into why I think it's fitting that we couldn't get the camera to work, Nice to meet you. I'm Jay. Nice to meet you, Clive.
Hi, Jay. I'm Clive. Yeah.
Very nice to meet you. I am already recording, so let's consider ourselves having just begun, okay?
Okay, doke. Fine.
Very good. Well, I was just going to say that it feels fitting that I don't actually get to see you on the video and that we're not using the video because you are a bit of a mystery. Like there's so little about you that I could find online, which is a fantastic thing.
Yes.
Very fantastic that I couldn't research you thoroughly online beforehand, but I usually do try to prepare and like listen to any interviews, but there's like basically nothing about you.
There's very little, if anything, no. Although I share to thousands of friends through the years, I keep very low key.
Yes.
Not even a mobile. I don't even have a mobile phone.
Oh my gosh. No mobile. That's so
no
admirable. Well, listen, the reason I even know about you is because I had a couple of conversations here on the show with Godfrey Devereaux.
Oh, Godfrey, yes, an old friend.
And
haven't seen him
for me, it was quite a trip because, the first yoga book I ever read in like the early 90s was a book that Godfrey wrote that I found at some bookstore. And then like 25 years later, I got to have these conversations with him about that book. And it was so interesting because we talked about like the way yoga became very popular and became very mainstreamed. And he had some regrets about that, I recall, actually. And so for me, the show, I've been doing it almost 10 years now. A lot of it has been about wanting to set some oral history and trace back kind of like how we got to where we are. And frankly, people I meet now, a lot of folks I meet who have come into yoga in maybe say the last 10 years, which is a pretty long time. But even in just the last 10 years, they have no frame of reference for the way things were like when I came to yoga, even in the early 90s.
Yes.
And the way I say it is that when I came in the early 90s, like the people whose class I went to, they had come into yoga either in like the 60s, 70s, or 80s. And when you wanted to get into yoga at that time, I remember one of my teachers talking about being inspired by the Beatles and traveling the hashish trail.
Oh, yes.
and then going to, meet the gurus, meet the yoga masters.
Yes.
And then a lot of those people, not all of them, but some of them, there was a couple waves of those people, it seems, who went to India and met them. And then they came back and they opened like storefronts on 2nd Avenue in Manhattan. And they put up pictures of the gurus and they started teaching these yoga classes. And I was one of the people who went to that class.
Okay.
And so for me, they still had like, they were bringing back what their experiences were from India. And it still had, it was a very mystical, countercultural move,
Yes, definitely.
So you fast forward, 10 years, like say 2002 maybe. And that's when yoga was really on the rise. And I was like, became a teacher and I was like,
yes. It was in suddenly in the 2000s.
It was becoming much bigger business. Yes. There was starting to be kind of like international teachers and stuff. And like stuff was kind of building. And then I opened a center in 2007. I was like following in the footsteps. We were all opening centers and things really started to get branded. And then, when I started this show in like 2015 is really when it was all kind of collapsing. And that was even before the pandemic, honestly.
Yes. Yes, right. COVID changed.
So things were kind of, even before the pandemic, things were kind of falling apart because the gurus were being disgraced and everything. So this is a long-winded way of saying.
A lot of gurus falling off their pedestals.
Yes. This is a long-winded way of saying that there's not a lot of people I get to talk to like you who have witnessed all of those decades of kind of progression. So I guess my first question to get to know you a little bit, Clive, because we know so little about you. When do you first discover yoga? A lot of people I talk to who are of your generation, it isn't like you just dropped into like some yoga class.
No.
Often it was like an experience, like someone had like awakening experiences. How did you enter into yoga? What do you remember? What brought you to it?
Well, in the early 60s, as a young teenager rebel, I was longing for adventure and still growing up in West London. And it was the time of, there was all the music happening and it was a wonderful scene, Rolling Stones and all the rest of it. Fantastic. And I wanted to go overseas and have adventure, but yoga wasn't in my head at all. And I'd read, I was very much into the American Beats generation, the writers and the poets, and particularly Jack Kerouac with his On the Road and Dharma Bums. They were like Bibles, and I thought, I'm just going to leave the UK and be a bum and go traveling. So I left the UK in 1965. Definitively, as in right, I'm on the road, and I travelled through Europe, South Europe, and up into Scandinavia, and then that winter, 65 to 66, down into the Middle East and into North Africa. And I did a whole adventure thing, meeting old Sufis and stuff like that. I had some wonderful characters in Morocco, particularly, and then back up to Scandinavia. I was sort of based in Sweden, and I still know yoga. And then like in the autumn of 1966, or it was August, I had the feeling I'd been studying, one of my hobbies, I was kind of background of sport, one of my hobbies was archery. And when I was growing up, my Japanese grandfather, or my stepfather, my dad's stepfather, he had given me a book, an anthology of Zen poetry. And I had the thought suddenly, I'm going to go to Japan and study Kyudo, Zen archery. That was my idea. So I took off with a girlfriend from Stockholm. We hitchhiked down. This is in late summer 66. And then our first trip overland down to Istanbul, and then across through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan. Very wild, very dangerous. Not meeting anybody. The odd one or two spaced out Westerners along the way. But this was pre the big movement, the big hippie move out to the east. And I think the Stones had already been out, not the Stones, the Beatles had already been there in the 60s, but I wasn't called to the Beatles, but we carried on through Afghanistan into India and up into Kathmandu. So it was like, and in Kathmandu we met maybe 20 foreigners from like around the planet. It was like the big crowd. Kathmandu in 1966 was amazing. It was a medieval, ancient, magical place. And still no yoga. And then went down to Varanasi on the Ganges, and had a very mystical experience, which I can describe later, if you like, which was actually the root of then my whole mystical journey. And then carried on trying to get to Japan, but in Thailand, I went down with hepatitis and came back to Europe. And then in 1968, I picked up a book, Hatha Yoga by American traveler Theos Bernard. He'd written that in the 1940s, maybe. He was one of the wealthy travelers, Western travelers, who traveled out to Tibet between the wars in the 1930s, 40s, like that, along with Evans Wentz and a few Lama Govindos, some very interesting characters, wealthy Westerners who were into Tibetan Buddhism and stuff like that. Way of the White Clouds, and some wonderful books. They were all my Bibles in those early years. And then, anyway, this book, so he was, and Theos Bernard, he was murdered up in the mountains, the Himalayas, during the partition, Hindus, Muslims, when they were changing over, and there was 1 million people murdered, and he was murdered by the Hindu Muslims. But before that, he published his book, Hatha Yoga. And so I picked up this little book, and it had some photos of him and an interesting description. And I just started reading the book, and I started practicing. I was very physical, into different sports. So I just love,
did it have like poses and practices for you to follow along with?
A very clear, very cosmic description of practices and what he'd studied with this guru in India sometime in the 1940s or even 30s. I don't know. But it was a very compact little book, Hatha Yoga, Theos Bernard, and a wonderful little book, and it had photos, descriptions of pranayama and so on. And when I was in India in the 60s, in 66, I'd seen yogis, I thought, wow, this is far out, because I was very physical, but I wasn't called to the practice. But this little book called me, so I started practicing day in, day out from this little Hatha Yoga text. And then anyway, I didn't get back to India until 1971. And prior to that, I met, two things happened. First of all, Iyengar's Light on Yoga came out. The very first edition of Iyengar's Light on Yoga, a white cover with the red, and then all the photos were at the back of the book, like in a series. And so I carried Mr. Iyengar's book like a Bible for years, inspired me to go into and master most of the asana that was in his book. And it was a very wonderful thing. And at the same time, I met in Stockholm this wonderful little yogini Ma I met through a friend. She said, come along and meet my yoga teacher. And in 1971, there was no yoga, was still unheard of. But my little woman, Eugenia Basilevsky, she was from Estonia, and she'd escaped the Russians during the war and ended up in Germany. And then after the war, she met still in Germany, she'd met this Indian yogi fakir, Swami Dev Murti, real mad one. And he was living with his family in the Black Forest, and he invited her to come and live and study with him, be his main student. So she learned all the pranayamas and so on from him. And then in the early 50s, she moved to Sweden as a political refugee. And so she'd been teaching in Stockholm since the mid-50s. And I met her in 1971. And this little silver-haired angel, the most subtle being I've ever met. And she inspired me very much in the asana, and particularly in the pranayama. She had the key to pranayama, which is what I shared, to this day, passionately with all friends. And so I started studying with her. She became like my spiritual mother. And then that year I went off to India again. And after 1971, I didn't miss a season in India right until COVID. I spent through the 70s and the 80s most of every year in India, just popping back to Europe to visit family briefly and then see Scandinavia.
And when you were going to make those trips all those years, were you going to a specific ashram and a specific teacher?
Yes, well, so I've been reading all these old texts, all these old, stories of yogis, and somehow I was just called very deeply moved to explore. So every year I went to India, I'd go on a pilgrimage. I went down to Goa. And so there was I kept the balance of Goa, which was initially very quiet little gathering with a few foreign friends.
I went there in 1998. It was like rave parties all night long.
Oh, no, then it was totally in 1971, 72, there were little gatherings with a few guitars and maybe 30, 40 people. It was a crowd, it was magic times in Goa then, really magic. And then gradually acoustic music and then, rock and roll bands. And a long time before it got spoiled with the trance music. Well, I love trance, but in a certain environment. Yes. So I'd go to Goa and then I would travel off, and spring and autumn I started going to the mountains. So through the 1970s I discovered Manali, Kulu Manali, and up in Himachal Pradesh, which is a magic valley. And I would just go and do my practice every morning, get up early, an hour, 2 hours pranayama, go off somewhere into the forest and find a lovely rock and practice asana, and meditating a lot all the time, and then visiting various sacred places. And in wintertime, I'd go down to South India and I would explore. I went on pilgrimages every year to various states and various areas. And I was on a mystical journey. And I would sort of plug in. Whenever I came to a powerful temple, I'd stay maybe for a week. And I'd just sit early morning in the temple, go there in the evening time and just sit and really kind of soak up the juice. And one really plugs in to some of these sacred places because they're the seat of ancient, of practices since centuries. So I was there alone. Every time I went back to Sweden in the summertime, I'd spend time with Eugenia and I'd study with her and just spend time. And she was wonderful. She inspired me. She never got to India, but in her apartment, she had this large apartment filled with books. She had books in 10 languages on yoga, spiritual traditions, and the occult. And she spoke all these languages. She even studied Sanskrit in university there in Stockholm to read the Sanskrit texts. And you could pick up any book, and we're talking tens of thousands of books. You could pick up any book, open it, and it would just be filled with little annotations. You can go through it. She was amazing. But she never went to India. And every summer I go back, spend some time with her. And then then I go back in the autumn time, go up into the Himalaya for a month, 6 weeks, then go down south, go to Goa for Christmas, New Year, and then off into the South Indian jungle somewhere and practice, then back to Goa before going back up into the mountains, something like that. And meeting
and through all these travels, did you have jobs that you took?
I would go back to Stockholm, and I would. Did
you have another thing that you did, like a money gig?
No, I was until I started teaching. I had a friend who had a translation office. I learned Swedish. I was very much into languages before yoga, and I learned very good Swedish very quickly. And so this friend would give me translation jobs in the summertime, translating articles and brochures, Swedish into English. So in 2 months there, I'd make enough money to go back to India, because
it was cheap. I remember you didn't have to have a lot of money to get around India.
Yeah, in the 70s, you could live on $2-3 a day, really comfortably. Yeah. So the 2 months in Sweden, and then in about 75, Eugenia said to me in Stockholm, Clive, next week you're going to start teaching. And I'm like, Eugenia, what do you mean teach? She said, I've organized some classes for you. And in those days, there were no yoga teacher trainings, as far as I was concerned.
Wait, I have to stop you for 1 second right here, because people who listen to this show have heard me say this all the time, that there was a time back in the day where there was no teacher trainings, and the way that you became a teacher is all of a sudden, out of nowhere, your teacher turned to you and said, I need you to cover for me. And you're living proof that was true.
Yeah, there were no teacher trainings. And she'd asked me years before, Clive, one day you'll be a wonderful teacher. And I said, Eugenia, I don't want to teach. I just want to be a yogi. And then she said, next week you're starting to teach. And she'd organized several adult education centers, like in the evening time, and various centers in Stockholm at the architects sent all these different people. And I was going even to the main mental hospital in Stockholm. I was going there and teaching to a group of like really one flew out of the cuckoo nest kind of group. It was amazing. And I was buzzing around teaching, and I spent about 3 full winters in Stockholm through those 70s, and then I'd go back in between, then go back to Sweden, to India in the spring or whatever. So
and when you were in India, what were you doing? You were just like meditating and taking in the juice, or all those years?
I was just plugging in to all the sacred places. So through the 70s, anyway, come 76, 77, friends and go said, hey man, why go back to Sweden? Come and stay here and teach us. So I started teaching. I think I was probably the first, as it were, someone officially giving classes in Goa in 1976. I think it was, probably I was the first. A year later, a German friend of mine, Martin, he was a karate. He started giving karate type classes. But we started on the beach, and because it was so unpredictable with the tides, then I started giving weekly classes in a friend's house in Candlin Beach, and my own little house in Baga Beach and South End, and I'd be buzzing up and down the coast, sharing passionately.
All right. Well, what was the practice like that you were teaching at that time?
Well, I was sharing pranayama and asana, because that was my daily practice. And by the late 70s, I would get up in the morning, sit for 45 minutes, whatever. And then I would have 2 hours pranayama. This is my own practice, 2 hours pranayama, at least 2 hours, and then 2 to 3 hours asana. So I was spending the whole morning in sadhana, wherever I was, and then I go off into the day and do whatever. So I was sharing pranayama and asana in the workshops. It'd be like a 2 hours morning session, something like that. And yes, I continued. In the meantime, I'd also explored like the Buddhist teachings. So I was when I was in Sweden, I did 3 Vipassana retreats, 3 years running in the summertime, somewhere up in the north of Sweden, a beautiful center there. One with an American teacher, he's famous, but I can't think of it. And then 2 years following that with Ruth Dennison. She's passed away now. Madhamma, who was a very wild, eccentric teacher, wonderful, wonderful lady, Ruth Madhamma. And to the point where she asked me, she said, Clive, will you lead a 45-minute asana session before the sitting? Can you imagine? This is a Vipassana retreat where you're not allowed to do any yoga, anything. And she was a total rebel. And she said to me, Clive, everyone's so stiff. Would you mind doing 45-minute asana? I'm like, fine, Ruth, if anyone's interested. And of course, the whole group came. So we would do 45-minute asana before the sitting. I did no pranayama with them, but the sitting was there. And then,
now, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm curious about this asana that you were doing. Was it in a certain style? Was it like Iyengar holding poses? Did it have a breath at the center? Or did you do asana and pranayama separate? Like, what was the kind of approach?
Definitely pranayama separately. Not during this retreat, but generally I would sit. I'd start. My pranayama sessions are based on morning practice, always starting with the rhythmic breath. So it would be Agnisari, which is a form of Kapalabhati. A little bit of a different variation to stimulate the solar center, and then Bhastrika, carefully introduced so people don't stress out and stress themselves. Bellows breath, and then always one of the classical 1 or 2 rhythms, Nadi Shivadana, always alternate nostril breath, Anuloma, and then the prana square, Samavriti pranayama, and then the 1-4-2 rhythm, Visamavriti. So there were particular rhythms I introduced, and particularly on I started giving workshops because a friend said to me after some years in Goa, look, why didn't you start giving workshops? Because if there's a party, no one comes, they miss a week. And as the parties grew in Goa, so early 80s, I started giving 10-day workshops in various friends' big houses there or in their gardens. And then if there was a party, we dismissed the next day, basically. And so that's how gradually I started introducing friends to more intense practice. And so so I did the Vipassana, and I said to all the friends, and to this day, I say, do 3 10-day Vipassana retreats in your life just to clear things out. With all deep respect, as a day-to-day meditation is a little bit too sensitive, a bit too withdrawing, maybe. Because in those 70s, of course, all the traditions became very popular. They're the Vipassana freaks who I heard some friends couldn't even go out of their door living in the city somewhere because they came so sensitive. And there were the Tibetan Buddhist freaks doing their hundreds and thousands of prostrations. And then, of course, in 1976, I went to because I was carrying his book like a Bible. I went to a drop-in class at Mr. Pune with Mr. Iyengar. And because at that time you could just drop in, there was no crowds at all. And
how about that drop-in classes with BKS, eh?
And we were about 20 foreigners maybe there, and already a crowd in the mid 70s. A lot of friends coming from Pune, of course, from Rajneesh, and exploring Mr. Iyengar. And I lasted 3 weeks, and it was a brutal boot camp.
What was your impression? Like, what had you heard about him that made you go to meet him? And what was your experience like? Oh, you had the book. Of course, you had the book.
I had the book, and I carried that like a Bible. And because there was a series, in the first edition, all the photos were at the back I started exploring my own vinyasa. So that later on, when Ashtanga came into the world, people would say to me, what a beautiful vinyasa, but I don't recognize it. And I'm sorry, it's my own vinyasa. It's different every time. So I'd basically... Oh,
that's interesting. I'm sorry to interrupt you again, but I remember someone talking about doing vinyasa with Mr. Iyengar.
That I don't know. I didn't hear. But it was a very, it was very uptight, very aggressive, and his Indian assistants were more aggressive than he was. And by the time we slapped and had my hair pulled a couple of times, after 3 weeks, I thought, I'm out of here.
So you experienced that because that's what they say, they sometimes say, bite, kick, slap, or whatever.
I remember the first time, the first morning I stood there, we were all standing in Tadasana, standing straight in 2 lines, and there was a young American got in front of me, and Mr. Iyengar came by, and he just looked at her, and he slapped, and he hit his hand across her face, so her head just swung to the right, or to whichever, and he said, relax. And we were like standing there. He literally slapped her so hard. And that was the first morning I thought, shit, how am I going to, after Eugenia, who'd been such a cosmic little angel, yogini, inspiration. Yeah. So after 3 weeks, I walked out of there, and after I'd been abused by one of the assistants, I thought, that's it, I'm not going back. But I respect Mr. Iyengar deeply for his remedial yoga. I have a very dear Indian friend who had a serious heart condition, and in the 80s, he spent 3 months with Mr. Iyengar, and he's still cruising. He's a master bansuri player, and he's still playing, and he's still full power. So and he said Mr. Iyengar is a remedial teacher, is a master, and a wonderful master in his own right, but very strict. No joy, and very strict around the pranayama. From my heart feeling is one introduces pranayama and asana at the same time, not to practice together, but you practice pranayama, you practice asana, and so the body gradually opens up and the breath opens up the body, rather than mastering Padmasana or whatever before you start pranayama, and you're way behind with the pranayama then, way behind.
All right, well, listen, let's Let's put a pin in what you're talking about in terms of pranayama and practice. We'll come back to that. I want to ask you now about like all of that you just shared, all those years of you continually going back to India to plug in. Like in my experience, like someone has a very deep reason why they do that. Like it's not, you don't do that casually. Like, see, that's the thing. Nowadays, yoga became a thing where like people pay and then you give it to them. It's not like the same sort of, it doesn't require the same kind of investment or whatnot. And I guess I'm curious, you mentioned this experience in Varanasi that you had, that you pointed to earlier. It seems to me that points to maybe what the underlying drive is behind you making your life of this.
Good you come back to that. Well, initially, before I went on the road traveling, as I say, in that early 60s, and I was reading all these various texts, and it was all about enlightenment, about self-realization, and whatever the practice was, Tibetan, Indian, or otherwise, it was about liberation, and that stayed with me very deeply in my heart, and I had this longing to be free, basically. And so in 1966, with this girlfriend, there was no yoga, no meditation, no idea about India. As far as we were concerned, we were on our way to Japan. And we came to Varanasi. It was October time. Got off the train. It was crowded with people. And we didn't know it was the last day of Durga Puja, which is the great Goddess Durga, great mother of the universe. It was the last day of the 10 days of celebrations to her. And we pushed our way down through to the Ghats, the big steps that go down to the Ganga. And there were hundreds of thousands of people, and it was packed with all the, and 1966, pre-plastic, almost pre-concrete. It was just all the tribes, every villager, the women in their different saris. I mean, it was just a whole tribal, magical thing. And we pushed our way down through, and there was music, drumming, mad drumming going. And down on the Ganga, there were every 100 meters a big, like a dhow, open-decked dhow, fishing boat. And at the stern of the back of the boat would be like a giant, maybe at least 3-meter statue of Durga on her tiger. And the picture you've seen probably papier-mâché on a wooden frame. I'm not sure. Gigantic, garish, colorful Durga on her tiger. Every 100 meters or maybe 200 meters along the Ghats. And in between all little boats all jammed in, and the music and the people flooding in and just finding a place to put their blanket down for the next day or two or whatever. And it was packed, and we squeezed our way down, having no idea what was going on. We said, wow, this is pretty far out. 1966, we were 20 years old. And we came right down near one of these big boats with the Durga. And there were some wild sadhu characters, like doing martial arts with staffs and doing all sorts of stuff. Very exciting stuff. And in time with the music. And then we heard, oh, Saab, Mem Saab. And in the 60s, as a Westerner, you were still, as a man, Saab, and as a woman, Mem Saab, because that's from the British Raj time. So, Mem Saab, Saab. And we looked in there, please come and join us. And there was a boat right next to one of the big boats. And there were 4 couples, I think Indian couples there, wealthy, they spoke English. Please come and have some chai with us. So we were starving. We got on the boat, and we started sitting with them, and they offered us, samosa, and we were chatting away. And the hours went by. We were sitting there with them, being offered different snacks and sweets and things. And then all the guys dancing, doing their martial arts, they finished and went off. And the boat was empty, the big boat next to us. And it was probably about 50 to 20 meter long deck with about 8 meters wide, something like that. It was a big old fishing boat. And anyway, the music was amazing, this drumming constantly. And I started feeling this energy flowing through me. And I stood up, and I was on their little boat, their boat. And I said to them, I said to one of the guys, wow, this is amazing. This music, it makes me feel like I want to dance. And he said, well, yes, but please dance for us. And I'm like, no. It's not my religion, man. No, thank you. No. And then I carried on kind of gazing, and he turned back, and then it was about 4 PM. And then next thing, his hands grab me, and the 4 guys lift me, and the deck of the boat that was a bit high, so they lifted me up and they literally threw me gently barefoot onto the deck of the boat where the Durga was. And I have no further recollection of what happened. And my girlfriend said I took off like a dervish, and I was dancing madly around the deck in front of Durga and around, dancing, prancing like a complete mad thing, total dervish. And she said, and after a few minutes, two of the guys ran on and they stopped me and they gave me a big clay pot with burning embers and then the incense on the top. And I remember years later in Bihar and West Bengal and so on, people were going to trance, and very gently they would dance in front of the goddess with these big pot of incense. And they gave it to me and I broke away from them. And within seconds, I tipped the pot and all these burning embers were down on my hair and all over my little Lucknow chikan, a little like cotton shirt, kurta type thing with embroidery, and it was burning right through me, and I was just dancing, and they grabbed me and brushed off all the embers, and later on I found that my whole shirt was burnt away, but there wasn't one blister on my skin, and I broke away again, and I was dancing. I just have a vague recollection of Durga's eyes, the tiger's teeth, the Ganga, the crowds, and as I was spinning around, and then at about my girlfriend said at least 20 minutes to half an hour, you were dancing madly. And then I was thrown face down, prostrate at the feet of the goddess. And I'd never seen prostration. This was prior to 1966. No, I'd never seen a prostration. And my body was thrown down, didn't have my nose, my arms in front of me, completely face down at the feet of the goddess. And I lay there and I had kind of in a semi-coma, realizing I was lying there, unable to move, kind of just gasping for breath. And I lay there for some minutes, and then gentle hands picked me up, and they turned me over, and as they were carrying me off the boat, the four guys, and I was facing up to the sky, and then my head was lolling down. And as I moved, they carried me towards the edge of the boat to lower me into their small boat. I looked towards the shore, and there was a stampede of people running towards us. And I thought, oh no, I've danced in front of the goddess. They're really angry. They want to beat me. So they lowered me down. Oh, this is really great. They lowered me down onto the bench on the boat. And then there was pandemonium. There was just a stampede of people jumping onto our boat and rubbing my feet, my legs, my genitals, my chest, my face, just mad. And the boat was sinking, so the guys got lattes, and they were beating the people back. And the people was there, like, taking turns to jump on and rub me to get the Shakti. They see me in the embrace of the goddess, and they wanted to get some of the juice. And it turned out, I didn't know this. I had no idea. I heard this, I realized this later. So we were fighting I was lying there completely spaced out. My girlfriend sitting there with her jaw open, like, what is going on? And then dozens of people rubbing me, all my hair, everything.
So when that was happening, were you like awake and conscious, or were you just totally out of it?
Semi-conscious. I was semi-conscious, lying there like, what's going on? I couldn't move. I was completely blown away. And then finally they fought them back, and people went back to their places. And then everything calmed down. I lay there for another half hour, completely spaced out. And then one of the ladies said, would you like a cup of tea? So I said, okay. So I got up and had some tea. I said, not a word was spoken. Not a word was spoken, as in, wow, you had the grace of the goddess coming into you, because through the years, I saw women and men too in trance in front of the deity. It happens. So
is that what you would say happened, that you went into a trance?
Definitely. So I had no idea. No one spoke a word of it. My friend and I, we didn't speak of it. And then
did you know that all that happened, or did that get told to you later?
No, I recollect being semi-conscious. I recollect this massive hands rubbing me everywhere. And I was lying there completely helpless, thinking, what is going on? When I realized they weren't going to beat me up, I thought, what are they doing? And it was only years later that I realized that they were rubbing to get the Shakti, to pick up some of the energy that was still in me from this experience. So, and I had no idea who Durga was, so we're talking the mystical, inexplicable.
Had you had any other kind of like mystical experiences prior to that?
Later on through the years, yes, many. I could speak to you for hours of mystical experience.
No, I mean like prior to that though, like as a young man at age 20, you had already been open to mystical experience.
None at all. No. In 66, prior to any yoga, any meditation, nothing at all. None at all that I could recollect, no.
And do you think it was just like, I mean, interestingly enough, the only time I went to India was in 1998, and I had not an experience like yours, but I was at in Haridwar. There was like this big festival happening, and I kind of happened into it, and I was like, oh my God, and I got swept up, and this wonderful people helped me participate. But I didn't have this kind of crazy thing happen that you had.
No. I mean, dancing on the deck in front of the goddess was pretty far out in front of.
I mean, did you, after it happened, were in your own mind, were you like, holy crap, what just happened?
Well, I had no reference. At that point, I had no reference at all. I had no understanding. Only later on, that I began to realize actually it was, they were getting, rubbing to get energy from me for that basically. But I had no, so it came into the evening, into the night, and they invited us onto the big boat. And then just before midnight, they came with baskets of fruits and vegetables, and the drummers came on all the main boats, and we all rowed out just before midnight. And at midnight, we were throwing the fruits and vegetables into the Ganga for Durga. And then at midnight, I helped lift this big statue of the goddess from the boat and over the edge and let her submerge. And at midnight, you submerge Durga and that's the end of the festival. Submerge Durga into the Ganga. And there's a crescendo of drums, and there were thousands of little oil lamps and hundreds of little boats all around. The last memory was as of her big eyes just flashing at me as she went under the water, and then silence. The drum stopped, and the boat was rowed back with big oars back to the Ganga, and it was good night, thank you very much, and we went back to our rooms. And my friend and I, we never spoke of it. And then through the years, fast track 24 years, when I met my old Sat Guru, way beyond after many adventures. And he said to me, Clive, I don't understand how you have this strong connection with the goddess. Already when you came to me, I met him in West Bengal, and he said, you already have this strong connection. You've had this. And then he said, what, did something happen particularly in early years? And I thought about it, and I told him this story. He said, that explains it. He said, in Varanasi, the Durga, her manifestation is Annapurna, the goddess of plenty, and the image is Shiva is a wild mendicant with his begging bowl, the Ganga, and Annapurna, the goddess of plenty, she's pouring milk into his begging bowl. That's the image of the goddess there, Annapurna, the goddess of plenty. And he said, ever since that day, the goddess has been carrying you. Has been caring and guiding you. And I just burst into tears. And then the whole journey of the past 20 odd years became very, very clear to me, the mystical awakenings and things that happened to me. And I had the very clear vision. It was completely out of my hands. There was no plan in any of it. No plan at all. And prior to that, I had the realization that, and I asked a couple of Swamis, they said, they were rubbing to get the Shakti from you. They saw you in trance. They were rubbing to get some of the Shakti. So,
no, I
how
mean,
do you explain that?
But that's what I'm saying. Like that coming into yoga isn't like dropping into the class at the gym. You know what I mean?
No. So this is way before yoga. I know. And then 2 years later, pick up this book, Hatha Yoga. 3 years later, Iyengar Yoga comes out, the Iyengar book, and then meeting my yogini ma, who then gets me teaching in the late 70s. And that's how ever since then I've been sharing, of course.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. So starting in, I mean, we'll come back to some of the kind of the ramifications of that mystical experience that you had.
Yes.
But now I'm curious about how things have gone over the years. Like I started talking with you today. So you became a teacher, but a lot of folks kind of ended up making kind of careers of it. But as you said, you've been very low key. Well, how have you managed to do that? How have you managed to do? What happened to you in the 90s?
Well, I started sharing. I started off asking when the friend said to me, "Go, look, Clive, you start teaching us." So when I started giving the the weekly classes, and then particularly the 10-day workshops, which would be then at maybe the beginning of the 80s. And I charged a nominal amount for 10 days, like we do 3 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, something like that. So I charge a very reasonable fee, to the point where after some years, friends said to me, look, Clive, man, you've got to charge more because people don't appreciate what you're sharing.
Yeah, if you don't pay enough, it's not valuable. Yeah.
That's true. So I did, but to this day, I'm very, very reasonable with my prices. But I've lived all my life since those early years through teaching yoga, all the years, without exception. Yeah.
And so has that always been like you conducting your own classes, or places hosting you? Like, what did it? Did you ever own a center? Like, how did you hold it down all these years?
I never wanted a center. I wanted the freedom to not have a center. So friends would invite me. So I started teaching there in Goa, and then I would start getting invites back.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.